to me, I define it as the opportunity to live a normal life. Whether you do, something amazing or whether you just live every day. Like that is the definition of survivor. And I think that, not everybody gets that opportunity, unfortunately. For me going through it as a kid, I looked at cancer as just one thing that I have to do in order to become a normal kid. And, it was really hard as a kid to wrap your mind around, like, why do I have to do this and my friends don't? But I look at it as from the adult perspective, and I see these people out there who've been diagnosed once, twice, three times. They've gone through it multiple times. They have their family there. They've kept their support. They've kept their zest for life. They've kept all these things. And like, that is the definition of survivor. Like, these people are living and living every day to the fullest.
Hi, I'm Chris Waddell. Welcome to Living It, the podcast where we join experts in the experience of being human. Be bold. Say yes to adventure. Say yes to living it. Welcome to Chris Waddell Living It, where we talk with experts in the experience of being human. Those people who have taken the risk to realize their dreams and live fully. You will agree, Bryan Fletcher is one of those people. He's a two-time Olympian, 2014, 2018, won a bronze medal in the World Championships, 5 World Championship teams. But this is the big thing. He was a cancer survivor as a kid, had leukemia at 3 years old, is now actually a PA for one of the preeminent knee guys in the world, Dr. Cooley. And I guess I didn't mention his sport. He was a Nordic Combined skier. We're going to learn more about what Nordic Combined is. Bryan, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Chris.
Nordic Combined, can we start there? Because the thing is, I think that a lot of people, some of the people might have seen like 2010 with Billy and the team, but a lot of people don't know exactly what Nordic Combined is. What is Nordic Combined?
Absolutely. So Nordic Combined is the combination of ski jumping and cross country racing into one sport. It was kind of born in Scandinavia, and it originated because both of them were quote unquote Nordic sports. They both had a free heel. So back in the day, somebody got together and said, hey, you know what? We should see who's the best at Nordic sports. So let's create Nordic Combined. Fast forward to today.
Long distance jumping, right? This is not aerials. This is going 120 meters plus kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So the ski jumping, the long distance jumping, and then the cross country racing. And, if you fast forward to today with that sport, it's two polar opposite sports. Ski jumping is you have to be light and lean and fast twitch, and cross country, well, we all know you have to have endurance and slow twitch muscle. And so it's kind of the polar opposite of performance these days. But, it kind of makes for an exciting sport. And basically the way it works is you jump first. Winner of the jumping gets to start at 0-0. And then after that, you ski a 10-kilometer cross country race on average, and the first person across the finish line wins.
So it's the people who are the best jumpers have effectively a head start in the cross country skiing. And you often were a better skier than you, at least toward the end of your career, a better skier than you were a jumper. So you were giving people a head start and then having to chase them down. What's the mental part that goes into, because I remember being on a jump as a kid, like 90-meter over at Lake Placid, and watching guys go off of this and thinking, I'm scared and I'm not going anywhere. You're up at the top of this rickety looking, I mean, granted, it's not going to blow over or anything, we don't think, but it's not a whole lot on there where you're sitting on the board and ready to go. And it's just two little slots. There's no exit. Like, if you're committed, once you go, you're completely committed. What goes through your mind at the top of a jump?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, as I started out in the sport, I started at a young age, and I never really thought about it like that. I just saw the jumps and was like, man, those are the biggest jumps in the world. That's what I got to do. And, you start small and you progress your way up, but certainly there's no stopping once you commit to go off the jump. You're in a track, and in today's sport, there are artificial tracks that are made out of refrigerated ice. You couldn't get out of it if you wanted to. So, it's definitely a little bit scary, but going through the mind, it's initially it starts out as fun. I started out and it was just the thrill of flying that drew me to the sport. And as you got better, that feeling kind of sticks with you because, I started noticing that like as I got better at the sport, you're jumping farther with less in-run speed. And that made that feeling of flying even better. And so I just you kind of get addicted to it where you're like, man, I'm flying through the air, I'm going further and further. And so you're at the top of the hill, you're thinking about your technique, you're thinking about all the things that you're going to do in order to have a jump where you get as much lift as possible and reduce your drag as much so you can fly as far as you possibly can. And it never got old. Every day that I was on the hill, certainly had frustrations at times and trials and tribulations throughout the years, but that feeling of flying never gets old.
How long were you in the air? I mean, they talk about distance, but they don't necessarily talk about hang time as
Yeah.
much. How long were you in the air? Because you really were flying.
Yeah, and it depends a little bit on the hill size and the way the hills are designed, but for the most part, you can be in the air anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds, maybe even longer. And it's just like this feeling that you can't shake off, especially in the air. I mean, you have full control of what you're doing, and you can feel when you get headwind and get lift, and you can feel when you get tailwind, and it sucks you down towards the hill, and you're trying to navigate all those changes in air pressure as you're flying through the air, which is just super fun.
So you jump and then you have to ski, which is an entirely different group of muscles. I mean, it's entirely different mentality too, right? I mean, how do
Yeah.
you shift from one to the other, or is it some of the the sheet of like, this is how far you flew that determines, does that get you fired up? You're like, okay, I just gave away 50 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. I'm ready to go as hard as I can. I want to go catch these little guys who've flown a long way.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, there's that element to it of like, the jumping is over in a heartbeat. And so it's a very much like you either perform or you don't. And I think initially the first thing that happens is either like an elated feeling when you jump really well, like almost like a relief. You're just so relieved that you jumped well and you're in a good position and the cross country race is still ahead. And then there's the opposite side of that, which is like, it goes over, it doesn't go the way you want, and you kind of have your heart sink and you're just bummed out because all of a sudden now you're in 50th place and you have a 10-kilometer race and you're 3 minutes back and you got to make it up and, try and get some points or at least salvage the day. And that's really difficult to do. And I think that, the mentality for the cross country side kind of changes based off of that strategy. Like, am I going to go out and ski a solo time trial from the back of the pack, or am I going to, play tactics today? Am I going to be in a dogfight where there's going to be a lot of, pushing and shoving and what we always say, racing is rubbing. You could be in the pack and doing all that stuff. So some of the mentality changes based off of where you end up after the jumping, and it quickly becomes a strategy thing where you're looking at the result sheet, seeing who's around you, what good skiers are you with, and who's ahead of you that you might be able to catch and when you need to make moves. So it really becomes like a calculated strategy almost immediately as soon as you see the results after the jumping competition.
And it's a lot like bike racing in that respect, right? If there's somebody fast around you, do you have somebody to work with that then
Yeah.
you can work together and try and reel in the people who are in front of you? And then, yeah, you might potentially get to a point where it is a pack finish and you have to, one, if you haven't jumped well, you have to catch up to the pack.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have
Yeah.
to save enough that you can be strategic within the pack, that it's not a moral victory of, well, I caught the pack. It's like, okay, can I save enough that I can actually do something and make some noise when I get there? Is that the exciting part for you? Like the
It is.
strategy, or?
Yeah, it is. And like you kind of said in the intro, I in the later part of my career, I got better at the cross country side of it. And, just to kind of put it in perspective, I think ski jumping is somewhat of a like golf. Like you can practice all you want. You can play golf every day, but it doesn't mean you're going to get any better. There is just like that limit to it sometimes. And there's not a direct correlation between how much you practice and how good you're going to get. And certainly the higher you get in the performance category of golf is like an exponential increase, right? it takes that much more work to get that much better. Well, ski jumping is very similar to that, but cross country, on the other hand, is very correlated. Certainly, there's natural talent in your endurance capacity, but the work you put into it is the work you're going to get out of it. You're always going to see improvement. And so for me, on the cross country side of things, as I got better and better, the older I got in the sport, I knew that I had that to fall back on. So for me, it was somewhat comforting to know that, like, no matter what, I can go out and I can push myself to the absolute limit, and I am going to be one of the top guys out there on the course today. And, it kind of was reassuring to know that I had the potential to make up a minute and a half, 2 minutes on guys sometimes. And so, knowing that, it kind of at times took the pressure off of jumping and made it a little bit easier for me. So yeah, I appreciated that aspect of it.
Made it a little easier for you. It's funny because I mean, like I raced wheelchairs, and I know you ride bikes and stuff like that too. Where it's kind of a funny situation because sometimes it seems like there are those people who are really good at going downhill, and the analogy might be that the jumping is the downhill, but then there are the people who are really good at going uphill. And yes, you are faster going uphill, but you also have to work that much harder and hurt that much more in order to realize your gains, right? So
Yeah.
I guess you have to enjoy that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the uphill side of it is a challenge. And I think that, like in bike racing and chair racing and stuff like that, you can take that risk on that downhill to get that 3 to 5 seconds or whatever it may be. And it's a lot of work, but it's also high risk. If you crash, you lose minutes. And on the cross country side, on the uphill, it's like, well, if I can get, 30 seconds on an uphill or a minute on an uphill, that is going to be a much bigger time difference. But certainly to get there, it's a much harder process, a much longer process. Somebody can become good at descending fairly quickly, but you don't get good at going uphill overnight. It takes time and a lot of investment to get there. And so when I started, really clicking in the cross country side of things, for me, that was like, hard work paying off, and kind of reassuring that, like, I knew that, in a race, like, I had that trick in my bag to be able to use, which was nice.
Definitely. Now, it was the jumping that hooked you, right? But
Hmm.
in what I've read, you were going through chemotherapy.
Yeah.
So there's a bit to unpack in terms of one, the jumping, and then the cross country skiing, all mixed in with the chemotherapy as a little kid. How did it work that you were going through chemotherapy and you convinced your parents that it was a good idea to
Yeah,
let you go off of a
absolutely.
ski jump?
Yeah. So I grew up in Steamboat, Colorado. It's a small town, northwestern Colorado, and it is a very much a winter sports community of the Steamboat Springs Winter Sports Club, which, the ski jumps are right downtown. So when I was first diagnosed, I was, obviously an avid skier. My dad had me on the mountain as much as possible, and I remember at that time I was one of those kids that just liked to hit the bumps and jumps on the side of the trail. So he'd always try and get me to do downhill turns and make these beautiful arcs. And I was like, nah, it's cool. I'm just going to go straight and hit that jump. And, he would tease me for it. But yeah, I was kind of diagnosed, and a little while into my treatment, I decided, I wanted to try ski jumping. And there was this learn to ski jump night down at Hallison Hill. And so I was like, that's what I want to do. And begged my parents, because I kind of had this, newfound negotiating tactic, being that I was going through cancer and stuff. I could kind of guilt trip them into letting me try something. So they agreed and signed me up. They talked to the doctors, and the doctor's like, well, it's not a good idea, but, do what makes them happy, and let them try it, not thinking that it was going to turn into anything. So I went out and I hit these jumps, and I was hooked. Like, it was the best feeling in the world. And flying through the air, and I went out and I started on the smallest jump and took a few there. I was like, that was really fun. And they're like, oh, you want to go up to the next level? And I was like, yeah, of course. Can I? And they're like, yeah, of course. So went up, jumped a little bit bigger hill, and that was like, again, the same, like, rush, and it was, much bigger. And they're like, okay, go try the next one. And once I got up to the next one, it was just like full on flying through the air. So I got done with that learn to jump night, and told my parents, like, you have to sign me up for this program. So of course they went and asked one of the coaches, like, hey, how do we sign up? Can we sign up next year for the program? Like, sure, just head into the office. You can sign up. You can start tomorrow. They weren't expecting that side of it. So I signed up and started the next day, and kind of went through the program, and became this powerful dichotomy for me because I was doing treatment down at Children's Hospital in Denver. And so it kind of worked out where I would go down for treatments and I would have to miss jumping. And it made me sad that I was missing jumping, and made me motivated to just do everything the doctors asked as quickly as possible, so we might get out of the hospital, a little bit sooner, and I might get back to jumping. But conversely, when I got back to Steamboat, it was, I was a normal kid in my winter stuff. They couldn't see that I had bald hair. They couldn't see that, or was bald and had no hair. They couldn't see the port in my shoulder. They couldn't see any of that. And they just, thought I was a normal kid. So out there on the hill flying through the air, I wasn't thinking about all the things I was going through. I was just a happy-go-lucky kid. And I think that distraction was super powerful for me and really worked well in my treatment, and kind of gave me some support along the way.
Something to live for. And so this is when you were 6 years old, right? And the leukemia diagnosis was when you were 3?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed at 3, and I started the sport when I was about 4 years old. And I did 3 years of intensive chemotherapy. And so by the time I was about 6 is right when I was about starting to get to the end of my treatment and into my remission study. I did a 2-year remission study to make sure the cancer didn't come back. And so, it was like, started out as every month I would go down to the hospital, then every other month. And then it was like, okay, every 6 months, and finally got the all clear. And it was just the best feeling in the world.
I'm sure. Were you weak though? I mean, you say that it gave you something to look forward to. It gave you the chance to be a normal kid, which there's so much in that, isn't it? Just like the health of your mind, the health of your being, hoping to help eradicate this cancer. But weren't you weak? I mean, you're pouring poison into your body. This is a little body that doesn't have a whole lot of ability to fight back at the time.
Yeah, certainly. And I was diagnosed in 1990. And back then, I was in a, like, quote unquote experimental protocol for pediatric cancers, new treatments. And it worked wonders, and it ended up becoming kind of the standard of care. And now, today is, of course, it's much better even. But at the time, they were pouring adult-sized doses of chemotherapy drugs into children and hoping, they would get better. And the principle behind that is, kids can handle a lot more. They're a little bit more resilient than adults are. And we have that drive and the cell turnover to be able to do it. So it was definitely times where I was super weak and fatigued, and, had to take days off. But I think, that mental release of being out there and getting to do the thing you love, and that just the fun you were having, overpowered the fatigue by a long shot. And there were days definitely when I didn't get off the couch, or wasn't able to do the things I wanted to do, or wasn't allowed to because my counts are too low. But there were any day that I could get out there, I was definitely out there.
Did any of the other kids know what was going on? I'd imagine that some of them did, some of your good friends.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of kids did. And most kids are super supportive. I mean, I remember I kind of had this like Ninja Turtle mentality of like, just embrace it. Like, you are who you are. And, the Ninja Turtles to me were this thing. So I remember this one story where, I went to preschool, and obviously, I was bald. I was going through this thing. I kind of looked funny, swollen from all the chemotherapy meds and steroids and whatever. And I remember just dressing up and painting my head green and going as a Ninja Turtle on the first day of preschool. And just like kind of the idea of embracing what you're going through, and, making it approachable to other kids. And so, yeah, definitely a lot of kids knew what I was going through, but, everybody was super supportive. And, I was happy to answer questions, which I think kind of destigmatized the whole thing for a lot of kids that I was surrounded by in the community.
Which turtle were you?
Good question. I have no idea, but if I had to guess, it was probably Michelangelo, but I have no idea.
Funny. No, so they were pouring adult doses of chemotherapy into you. Did you know what the side effects might be? And my orientation from this is really from reading Lance Armstrong's book, right? Where he was so exhausted because he was a professional cyclist. And if he was going to live, he wanted to return to being a professional cyclist, didn't want to compromise the lungs and the heart and the engine, effectively, that you had as a cross-country skier, how much did you know about what those side effects would be, and how much did they compromise your ability to, your cardiovascular system, your ability to be the engine that was pushing you to catch up and pass a lot of these people in the cross country side of it?
Yeah, I mean, good question. And like as a kid, I don't think I had a full grasp of what the side effects would be. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like when you're in that situation, you don't really care. It is what it is, and you're going to take those meds regardless because it's life or death, right? And so, going through it, there was, you hear today a lot more about the side effects. And as a kid, you have the swelling, the fatigue, the cell counts, days where you can't leave the hospital. And I've done a little bit of research into this as I've gotten older. I mean, adolescent young adults who go through this, I mean, it's striking. It's not what side effect you're going to have, but or if you're going to have side effects, it's what side effects you're going to have. It's just part of it. And so going through that, there's always that question in the back of your head: is this going to be a side effect of the medication, or am I at risk for other things that as I get older and as I age, you always wonder those questions. But I never thought too much about it as a kid. Certainly, as I got older, I definitely reflected on it a lot more and felt like, man, I went through this whole thing, and yet here I am with some of the world's best competitors, and I'm kind of known for my cardiovascular capabilities. And, some of the medications that I'm certainly took when I was a kid are, toxic for the heart, toxic for the lungs, toxic for the kidneys. And, so it's amazing to think that a kid can go through something like that and still reach the top of their sport. And even more amazing when adults do it. It's really cool to see that when people do it.
When people do it, yeah. But did you see, I mean, because you're talking about infinitesimal differences, really, when you get to the top of your sport, and it becomes so scientific, right? That
Yeah.
that it is this amount of output that you're going to put in, and that translates into these kinds of times, these kinds of splits. I mean, it's not like you don't have an idea when you go into a race where you're going to be. You have a pretty decent idea within a relatively small confidence interval. Did you see those side effects play out
Certainly
when
at
you were
times.
competing?
Yeah, I think at times, I often wonder, like, if you look at my brother compared to me, I'm a little bit shorter and he's a little bit taller, right? So there's certainly times where I wonder, like, hey, could I have had some stunted growth because of this? Or could I have had, changes in my muscle composition or things like that? But, I never really saw it bear any weight in my adult career as sport. But certainly as an adolescent, you wonder, how far am I going to be able to take this? Where is that limit going to hit, and where is that straw going to break of where I, find that breaking point or that tipping point of how I can't do it any longer. Thankfully for me, I never hit that spot. And, certainly I wonder if that is a difference between, how I maybe was like a good skier and maybe not a great skier. Could I have won more World Cups, or could I have performed at a higher level more consistently? Certainly there's things like that I often wonder, if that is a side effect of having so much treatment as a kid. But for the most part, I just tried to not think about that as an athlete and just go out and perform my best.
Control what you can control, really, because these other things, they can drive you crazy, but they're not gonna you're not gonna get a definitive answer off of it.
Yeah.
You said that jumping hooked you.
Hmm.
When did you go from jumping to Nordic Combined? And was that a difficult, like, hey, okay, we hooked you on this really sexy part of it. You get to go off this big jump and go fly. And now we want you to work really hard. And, I mean, you watch Nordic skiers finish, and what happens at the finish of every Nordic race is it's just a litter of casualties, almost, it looks like. I mean, everybody falls and their just chests are heaving and noses are running and all of this, and they can barely get back up. when did somebody say, "Hey, we want to take you from the sexy jumping and we want to move you into this land of like frozen snot and that kind of stuff?"
Yeah, that's a great question. It was actually by accident. So I had a bunch of friends that were doing the ski jumping, and I was doing it, and I was having a great time. And all my friends signed up for Nordic Combined, and they just said, "Oh yeah, they're all doing the full thing. They're doing the Nordic Combined this year." And I said, "Sweet, sign me up. I want to do it too." And then they handed me a pair of cross country skis, and I was like, "This is not what I was expecting." But it was pretty much too late. I'd already signed up. I'd already paid the dues, at that time, and I hopped on the skis and went out and gave it my best. And I was like, well, this sucks. But then, I kind of stuck with it because my friends were there, and so we'd be, a little bit more time at practice and things like that. And then we started competing, and I realized like fairly quickly that, hey, I have kind of a knack for this. Like the technique seems to becoming easy for me, and I have the endurance capacity a little bit, and I kind of enjoyed getting lost in the woods a lot. You go out to these cross country courses, and you would head out in the woods, and these trails would just lead for kilometers and through the woods, and I kind of found that super peaceful. And yeah, it was hard work and tiring, but at the same time it was like, serene. And once you got better and better, you could go further and further, and it was just like this peaceful thing. And ultimately it kind of became this zen thing for me where I enjoyed the challenge of cross country skiing. I enjoyed the environment that I was in, and I enjoyed, the pushing myself to the limits aspect of it on race day. And especially the tactical racing, as I got, better and better, and you start racing in packs, like we were kind of talking about, I really love that challenge of like, out strategizing somebody else, and seeing who can make the move at the right time, or who has the endurance to be able to go for another lap. That side of it was always super fun for me. And as a younger kid growing up, every year it was like a mystery. How much better am I going to get? Am I going to get better? And it was so rewarding to train all summer long through the heat, through, days that you didn't want to train, when all your buddies were down at the pool relaxing or doing those kinds of things. And you come into that season and you ski a personal best time in a race, or you beat some figure that you kind of look up to. It's just like the best feeling in the world. And I'll never forget that. And that's kind of what drew me to it, as like, okay, this isn't just a thing I want to do with my friends anymore. This is a thing I want to do all the time.
And cross country skiing is one of the most grueling sports in that you're using two systems at the same time, right? Using your upper body and your lower body, which you're not really doing in most other sports. Did the experience of going through chemo as a little kid, of experiencing, because pain is more profound when you're younger, right? When you don't have any point of reference. Did that help you? Was it a motivation? Was it even a consideration?
I think it did help. I mean, I think that going through that as a kid proved to me that I can do hard things, for one. It taught me to believe myself, as well. So, and then the cross country side of things, I think that correlated because, I learned how to, like, for example, as a kid going through chemo, you get used to needles real quick. And I hated needles. I'm still not a huge fan of them, or at least getting my blood drawn. I poke people every day, but uh, but it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, how am I going to get through this? And you rationalize with yourself, and you figure out a strategy of how you're going to coach yourself through it. And I think cross country was kind of the same thing. It's hard, but as soon as I learned that I could coach myself mentally through something that is challenging, the cross country became easier. So that pain, that challenge became, okay, how far can I take this? And how much longer can I do it? And I think back to my early days on the World Cup, skiing, and of course, I was starting from a little bit further back in the pack, but I would ski with a bunch of guys and see how it was going. And if I was holding my own, I would jump to the next group, and I would ski up and catch that next group. And then I remember sitting there being like, okay, I've caught him. Let's take some deep breaths. Let's breathe through this, get into the groove of things again, see if I can stay with this pack. And then you get there and you breathe and you get in a rhythm again, and you realize like, hey, I got more in me. I can go to the next one. And you ski through that pack and up to the next one. And then you sit there and you're like, okay, take stock of where you're at, how much pain you're in, how much reserve you think you have. And then all of a sudden you realize like, I got more, let's keep going. And so I kind of kept doing that through cross country, and it was using that mentality of like, I did when I was a kid. How can I coach myself through this challenge in order to get to that end result?
What's the stuff that you would say to yourself in terms of coaching, the coaching yourself into, I'm not going to say liking needles, but not hating needles?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, as a kid, there was no other option. So for that thing, it was for me, it was inevitable. Like I have to get my blood drawn today. So it was like, okay, I'm gonna get through this, and then my parents will, give me some sort of treat, I'm sure. So it was like, okay, I got to get through this to get to the other side. So it started out as that, but as it progressed, it was like, I think the motivator came, the nurses would be like, "Oh, you're so tough." And then once they said that, it was like, "Oh, I'm tough? Well, I'll show you how tough I am." And then it was like, "Okay, how many pokes can I do today?" And so it kind of became like this reassuring and affirmation thing that would happen where you're like, well, I'm tough. The nurses say I'm tough, so I must be tough. Like I can do this. And you start to challenge yourself, like I'm going to prove how tough I am. And then on the cross country side of things, as I got older, it was, you realize like, okay, I can do this for one. For two, I would always tell myself little tricks like that child's book, The Little Engine That Could. Like I think I can. Just those little things of saying like I can hold on 10 more seconds. I think Billy DeMong, said to me one time, he's like, when I get in a pack, sometimes I just tell myself hang on 10 more seconds, and then I'd count to 10, and when I got to 10, okay, 10 more seconds, and he would just kind of do those things. And for me it was like, okay, I'm here, and I'd look around at the guys around me and look at their faces and realize they're hurting just as much as I am, and it was like, okay, I'm tough, I can do this. And I'd breathe through it and just be like, relax, get comfortable here. And then you realize like, oh, this isn't so bad, I can keep going.
And you get better at it the more you do it.
Yeah, your threshold for it gets higher and higher, and your ability to be resilient in that moment gets higher. So it's like you go through the first couple times you do that and you hang on like one 10-second interval, and you're like, whoa, I hung with Hanu Monadin for 10 seconds, who was like one of the greatest guys in our sport for the longest time. And I remember like skiing with him for 10 seconds the first time. I'd be like, man, he must have been skiing like crazy, and I hung with him for 10 seconds. I bet that cut 30 seconds off my time today or whatever. And then the next time you go out and you ski with him for 30 seconds, you're like, holy cow. And then the next time, you're with him for the whole race or beating him. And it's just like, so that kind of stuff. And that happened with numerous guys throughout my career where, figures that I looked up to, that it was like realizing that I'm starting to get closer and closer to on par with them. And that not only am I able to ski in a race with them, but you look around and you're skiing with them, not, against them, not getting passed by them, but you're actually skiing with them and playing strategies and tactics. And that was super rewarding for me.
Suddenly they were looking at you as opposed to you looking at them.
Yeah, I mean, you're that new kid that just showed up, that fresh young kid with a talent, and it's kind of that fear. I mean, I remember kids coming onto the scene and just you think you got them in the bag, and then all of a sudden they just stomp you to the ground, and it's like, whoa, where did that come from? And so it's definitely that reward when you're younger and you're kind of I don't want to say ignorant in a way, but you are ignorant. Like it's just blissful. Like I'm going to go out and I'm going to do my best and I'm going to have fun doing it. And you don't have those expectations. You don't have those pressures on you. You're just going out there to be the best that you can be. And that's the best that athletics can be.
Is it reward oriented? You mentioned it a couple of times that when you were first a kid, that your parents would give you some treat afterwards. Maybe this was ice cream or whatever it was, but then it was the nurses going, "You're tough," and then you recognizing that you were tough. Is it reward oriented when you're putting in this work, or do you have to play some mind games? Are there times that you go, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make this hurt as much as possible? Because sometimes it seems like if you try to make it hurt as much as possible, you can never quite get there. As weird as that sounds too.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, exactly. You can never quite get there. And I think that for me, it was, I think the hard days came in the training aspect of it. Racing was fun. And when you get out in the race, everything just starts to flow. You're in that mindset of like, I'm going for it. I'm going to put myself in the hurt locker. Training were the hard days. When you wake up in the morning, you're tired from weeks of training on end, and you have, 4 hours of endurance training and intervals in the afternoon. And you're just like, I don't want to do this. I'm tired. The weather's crappy. It's raining. It's snowing, whatever it may be. It sucks. And so for me, kind of pushing through those days were the challenge, and like, the reward for me, where I was like, I need to push myself through this. If I can get through this training day, then when I get to race day, it's going to be easier. And that was certainly true. The summers were arduous, long training days. In the winter, it would fly by. And every weekend, when things start to click, you're pushing yourself to the max, but you can never quite reach that max because you put in so many hard days in the summer before. And I think that was a reward for me, knowing that, like, okay, I trained hard all summer and here's my payoff. Like, I'm going to race hard. I'm going to put myself in the hurt locker and I'm going to hurt some guys doing it. That was really rewarding for me, to be able to know that, like, I had that ability. And certainly there were days where it didn't pay off, but, it was like, okay, that day didn't pay off, but it was still hard work. And so when things started to turn around and click again, it always paid off and was always so rewarding.
Well, it sounds like you came to it really quickly, to the nature of the sport. When did you recognize that you could be somebody good? I mean, granted, you grew up in a place like Steamboat, right? So you do get a chance to see Olympians around you. It's not as much of a separation as seeing them on television. You might see them around or training or whatever. But when did you get to think that, hey, I might actually be able to go somewhere with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, well, I mean, to take it back a second, Steamboat, you're right. Like, you grow up around Olympians, you see them training every day, you understand the hard work that goes into it. And so, from that side of it, that's where my aspiration to push the sport, into, okay, I'm going to make, it started with, okay, I want to make junior worlds. And then it was like, okay, I want to make national championships. Okay, now I want to be on the US ski team, those kinds of things. Those stepwise goals kind of come naturally when you have that pipeline of talent around you. And then, kind of moving forward, I think it was like my freshman year of high school that I kind of had a breakout moment. At that year, I was a pretty good jumper, pretty good cross country skier, but definitely not the best guy. I was probably pretty average. But that year I put in a lot of work and I did a lot of training to get better at the jumping. And that next year I came out and just started crushing it on the jump hill. And it was kind of a surprise to my coaches. It was a surprise to me for sure. And it was super rewarding. I mean, I won a bunch of competitions. I did really well. And that was kind of the first moment that I realized, like, I took a step from being like not even considered for a junior worlds team to like almost making junior worlds, and actually like kind of letting people down when I didn't that year because I was just that high of a ranking. So that was like the first inkling that I was like, okay, maybe I can take this a little bit further. Fast forward a few years down the road, got named to the national team, and started skiing well, and made my first world championships in the first year that I was competing, and had a great opening to the season that year. And it was the 2006 Sapporo World Championships, or 2007 World Championships. And I had a great opening season where I did really well, scored a bunch of Continental Cup points right off the bat that year, and was kind of like, yeah, I'm going to make this. And I had this big ambition to like crush the second period of the competition season. And I went out and I just got demolished. Like, every race, just putting so much pressure on myself, like mentally beat myself before I even showed up to the hill. And then, one of the coaches said to me that year, he's like, you just need to relax. Your season's not over yet. Just kind of like that affirmation. Like, I know you're struggling and I know you really want to prove yourself, but like, you just need to relax. Things are going to come. It's not over yet. And then that took the pressure off just enough where I was able to like relax. And then it clicked and I made the world championship team and started skiing better again, and just totally blew myself out of the water, world championships, jumping and skiing. And so that was a moment where I was like, okay, I belong on the national team. And then when I won my first World Cup, actually take it back. First top 10 in the World Cup was a moment for me that was like solidified me on the World Cup stage.
Where
And
was
from
this?
there, that was in 2011, probably, in Ramsau, Austria. I got a seventh place. And at the time, I looked up to my coach, Dave Jarrett, immensely. And he came to me after that finish and he's like, you just beat my best time in, or my best finish in a World Cup ever. And to me, that was like, holy cow, I've made it. But that breaking that ice and getting into that top 10 just started a steamroll of of top 10 finishes for me. And it started like seventh, and then it was sixth, and then it was fifth, and then it was fourth. And I remember the day before I won my first World Cup, I asked Bill DeMong, I'm like, what places did you get before you won your first World Cup? And he said, I think I was like seventh, fourth, and then I won. And I was like, oh, crazy. And I'll never forget this moment. I won the King's Cup in 2012. It's in Holmenkollen. It's the longest running World Cup in Nordic history. And went out that day, last World Cup of the season. The day before, I had finished, okay, not great, but I was like, well, I'm not going to get on the podium this year. I'd finished fourth in the weekend before in Liberec, and I was like, that was my best finish to date. And I'm like, you know what? It's just not in the cards that I'll get on the podium this year. But that's okay. Went out and had a great morning. It was sun shining, last comp of the year. Crushed the jumping. Second round was canceled because of the warming weather for the jumping. And I was like sitting there in fourth place going into the cross country race and was like, holy crap, I have a shot at the podium here. But it was only like 45 seconds back to the chase group. And I was like, if I play my cards right, I could maybe get a podium finish here, but it was definitely not for sure. And there were all the strongest skiers in one group in the pack behind me. And so I was just like, I just need to focus on me and not worry about that. And I kind of came up with this strategy, which we can talk about, but at that moment, I was just like, well, let's just see what happened. Long story short, I won that day. And that moment for me was like, I belong here. And just all the hard work that you put in paid off. And I knew that from that moment forward, I had a few more years of skiing in me at the top level.
Did you decide that you were just going to go out and time trial and go all on your own and pick up the people in front of you and go as fast as you could? And if they ran you down, they ran you down?
Yes and no. This was actually the first race that I didn't just say, I'm going to do a solo time trial and see how far I can get up, try and negative split and all that, and just ski the hardest I can. This was the first race where I looked at the
negative split, meaning that you were going faster in the second half than you'd gone in the first half.
Exactly. So normally for endurance sports, you're always trying to negative split. You want to start slow, finish fast, right? And when you're solo skiing, that's what you got to do. You got to be, sitting there and your first lap's got to be a little bit slower so you can pick up the pace. And as more and more people get tired, you have more in the tank to catch them. And this was the first race where I looked at the field around me and I said, okay, I got a couple of good skiers, decent skiers with me. But they're not the best skiers. They're better jumpers. And then I had a huge gap, 45 seconds or 40 seconds back to the best skiers in the pack. Mikko Kokslian, Magnus Moen, Bill DeMong, just the list goes on and on. And they were just in this huge hurt train, which is normally where I probably would have been. And I'm like, man, those guys are going to be going hard. So I looked at it and I said, okay, I got easy skiers with me. I'm going to go out with them and just feel them out. And then I said to myself, well, when is the most demoralizing point of the race? And it's the third lap, because we'd ski on a 2.5K course. So it's 4 laps of 2.5K for the 10-kilometer race. So I got to the third lap, or I was going to go to the third lap. And I said, that's when I'm going to go hard. And I'm going to go hard and I'm going to try and hold my time at least steady. First lap, I'm like, I'm going to lose 10 seconds to the chase group. And then the second lap, I'll lose 10 seconds more. And the third lap, I want to put time back on to the chase group. And then I'll see what happens on the fourth lap. So I went out and it just executed perfectly. I was skiing with these guys and one by one, the guys I was with just kind of fell off and the chase group made up 10 seconds and then 15 seconds. And then the third lap, I put 10 seconds back into them. And it was just perfectly demoralizing to the point where I was like, I think I have a shot at this. Little did I know, and this just shows the power of believing in yourself and just your perspective, right? So I kept every lap we'd come into the stadium and I would look behind me to see where the chase group is. And every time I looked, they happened to go behind the biathlon bulletproof glass shade where I couldn't see them. So I would look at it and be like, the first lap, I thought they weren't even in the stadium yet. I thought that was the gap to 45 seconds. So I'm like, man, 45 seconds, that's a huge way. And I only need 1 second to win, right? I just need that 1 second gap for me to be in front. So I'm like, I can lose, 44 seconds. So I didn't see him there. And I keep skiing. I'm just believing in myself. And I'm like, I got this. I got this. And then I did my splits perfectly, put a little time back on the group. And then going into the fourth lap.
One quick question. How much of a benefit is there to being in a pack? Like in cycling, there's a big benefit to being in a pack, right? Because you can draft and you can change the lead. And so a pack should go faster
Yeah,
than an
absolutely. And
individual.
it's a huge benefit in cross country skiing too. The drafting, all those principles apply the same as cycling. You have drafting tactics, you have more people to lead and put on the chase. So, and I was solo with one or two other guys in the front. And, so we had a small group, but certainly no one was in a position to really put the hurt on and take the lead and take charge. So going into the last wrap, I come to the last hill and it's me and two other guys, and we get to the second to last hill, and I attack, and we get to the top of it, and it's just me and one other guy, and I'm like, I can't believe this. Like, I'm fighting for a podium. And I remember one of our supporters was there, and he's like, this is your day. This is your day. And I'm like, and I believed him. Like, I could sense it in his voice. Like, in that moment, I decided, like, this is my day. I'm going to win this day. And we went forward and get to the last hill, and I attack, and I just believe in myself, and come around the corner, and there's a whole bunch of the U.S. girls, ski jumpers, standing on the sidelines, and they're screaming and cheering. And instantly, I hear the panic in one of their voices, and I'm like, "Oh man, she sounds scared. Like, I better go." And so I start sprinting as hard as I can, and I look behind me, and Miko Kokslian's less than 2 seconds behind me, charging for the finish. Had I not heard that, and had I not believed in myself in that moment, I certainly would not have been on the podium that day. And it's so funny because the mind can just play a trick on you. Those guys were much closer than I anticipated, so much earlier in the race than I ever thought. But I believed in that moment, like, hey, I still have a chance here, and they're not even close to me. If I had seen them, I would have been like, holy cow, they're close. I don't have this. I need to back off so I can fight in the pack. And so it just puts into perspective that belief that you can have in yourself and how your mind can play tricks for you in your favor.
Well, panic can burn a whole lot of energy, can it?
Yeah, absolutely. And today, I still remember that feeling of like hearing the panic in her voice and just picking it up. Like I was about to just kind of cruise in and take the win because I had already dropped the other guy. I knew I had a 10-second gap on him at least. And I'll never forget that. And I decided to sprint from hearing her voice all the way to the finish, only to cross the line and look back and realize like that group was right there the entire time. So just, yeah, it was a super surreal moment for me.
When did you decide that you wanted to go into medicine? Does that happen early? I mean, you spent so much time in hospitals. Either you're going to go back to hospitals to work, or you're never going to go back to a hospital.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think growing up, I didn't anticipate ever going back into a hospital in any capacity. Certainly very grateful for everybody that, I worked with when I was a patient. They were so amazing. But as a kid, I always had kind of been drawn to science a little bit. I wouldn't say I was the best at it, but it was interesting to me. And, then athletics kind of took over and, it wasn't my primary focus. But as I started getting towards the end of my athletic career, I started thinking what's next for me, and, watched a lot of athletes go from that transition of being an athlete to trying to figure out what next in life and kind of struggle. And I told myself, like, I'm not going to do that. I want to be, kind of on a pathway of having a second career lined up. So initially I was studying sports, health education and promotion with a health science emphasis, and thought that I'd go into, maybe sports science or something like that. And I quickly realized that the people that I wanted to work with in sports science, or if I was a coach, it's kind of the same problem as being an athlete. Like, you're on the road a lot, you're going to be with the team a lot. And I knew that when you're young and single and they tell you, yeah, you're going to be on the road skiing for 6 months out of the year, you're super pumped. But when you're married with kids, it's like, okay, that's a little bit different story. And so I was like, I just don't see myself being able to do the job that I want to do and do it the way I want to, and having a family as a coach or in sports science. So then I started looking, okay, what other things can I do with my degree? And realized that, like, hey, this is a pathway to medicine. maybe I can do something in medicine. And then I learned about the physician assistant profession and was like, man, that seems like a pretty cool gig. And so, yeah, jumped on that and started researching that and learning about it. And next thing I knew, I kind of asked some people and learned that I knew a bunch of PAs in the area. And so I asked them about their profession, and everything that I was learning was just like phenomenal. And I was so interested in it. So I made a pathway forward and started taking the prerequisite classes and a plan to apply to PA school. And the day I retired in 2018, or I guess it was like 2 days after I retired, I flew home and to Park City and went down to Salt Lake and enrolled in my certified nursing assistant school, which is like a 2-week boot camp to get a license so I could start getting healthcare experience hours for PA school, and just started jumping on it. And it's been a fascinating journey ever since.
How old were you then?
Let's see, I would have been probably 32 or 33 when I retired from skiing. I'm 36 now. And so, yeah, I got to PA school in 2020 and started there May of 2020. And so went to school through the whole pandemic thing, which was a journey, and graduated this August. So, yeah.
And this is with 2 kids as well, right? That you were going through PA school. So you weren't sleeping much, is what I understand.
No, I wasn't sleeping much, and neither was my wife. A lot of late night studying, a lot of going. My wife worked full time during PA school too as a nurse in labor and delivery. So, I got to give her props because she, sacrificed a lot for us to be able to, for me to do this. And it was definitely a balancing act. She would work weekends when I wasn't in school, and during the week I was in school. And then in the evening, we'd just tag team the kids. And then after the kids were to bed, I went go back and study as much as I could and get up the next morning bright and early, try and cram any information I could before the tests, and, just keep pushing forward. So it was definitely a challenge and a lot of late nights. And
Did you have any time to procrastinate?
not as much as I would have liked. I procrastinated by like taking my kids skiing or doing things like that as much as I could. And I got a few days in the backcountry or a few days alpine skiing or cross country skiing, but certainly not as much procrastination as I would have liked.
And when you had to work, you had this set amount of time and this set amount of things that you needed to learn or you needed to do in order to keep moving forward and keep your head above water.
Yeah.
How much of it was going into PA school? Because now, I mean, you're in a super competitive field, right? Being in orthopedic surgery and at one of the top practitioners in the country, in the world, really. And how much of it is competitive? How much of it is wanting to give back? Because you do a variety of other things too, right? I mean, like we did Shred for Red, which is raising money for Leukemia Society last weekend, CC Thrive. How much of it is the competitive side? How much of it is the wanting to give back, or are they exactly the same kind of thing?
Not too much of it is the competitive side of things. I mean, certainly I'm a competitive person, but I think more than anything else, like I love to do things well. And so PA school became a challenge for me, but also it was like I wanted to do well in that and kind of master what I was learning. And certainly that's nearly impossible to do in medicine. Like you never master anything in medicine. And so, but I set out with the goal of like, I want to be as proficient as I possibly can. And going through PA school, learning something new after being in the same sport in the same area for so long was so refreshing to be learning new things and just have things where it was almost humbling in a way to go from like an expert in one field to like knowing nothing in another field and having to start at the bottom and work your way up and try and learn all this new information. And it was really motivating for me. And so going into that and then combine that with the giving back, I've always loved giving back. I think it was probably my first or second year on the US ski team that I was like, okay, I'm on the team. I got a solid spot. I need to have a way to give back to people because I wouldn't be here without, the cancer community supporting me over the years. So I started just doing various run walks and, helping out organize events and doing that kind of stuff. And then I got involved with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society doing team and training and little projects here and there. And it just kind of spiraled. So the giving back side of it was super rewarding for me naturally. Volunteering my time and seeing how much of an impact it makes on people's lives was really rewarding. So I just kind of like that aspect. And then I really like the appeal of being able to work in medicine and being able to give back to people in a way, by providing care for them and to make that my profession. And so it kind of worked in that regard where I was motivated to learn because it was new information. I really enjoyed giving back. And now here was an opportunity that I could do it as a career. And so that's kind of how I ended up where I am. And, to be with the orthopedic partners and Dr. Cooley is certainly humbling to be with those guys that are the masters of their field and as good as they are, but also a fantastic learning opportunity. So I'm grateful to be there.
Where were you with regard to your fellow students when you were going through PA school? Because were a lot of them studying the whole time while you were out cross-country skiing and flying off of jumps?
Well, I had retired at this point, so I was with them in the trenches studying, but I drew a lot of inspiration off of the jumping side of things. And I think my experience in athletics really helped me to understand that work-life balance of it, and also how to put in time and motivation studying, understanding what's important and how to relate to patients and how to communicate with patients. You get a lot of practice being speaking and communicating with people as an athlete, right? So going into the PA school, I think the biggest challenge was going from training 10 hours a day to sitting 10 hours a day, or, not exercising 10 hours a day. That was a challenge for me to like kind of change your whole identity and, go from this world where it's like, man, you wake up and it's bright and sunny and you're going to go for like a 7-hour endurance session, and then you're going to eat good food along the way, and then you're going to come home and take a huge nap and get up and do it again the next day. Like, athletics is really selfish in a way, and it's really fun to do that kind of stuff. And here you are in another field, and you are responsible for people's health, and you are responsible for learning this information and knowing it. And it's a challenge. So I drew a lot of motivation and knowledge off of being able to persist in those challenges throughout PA school from my athletic career.
We talked a little bit about Shred for Red.
Mm-hmm.
What is Shred for Red, and what does it do?
Yeah, great question. So Shred was founded 5 years ago by myself and a few other individuals who were involved with Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And we got together and we had done team and training. We had done a few things, and we were like, man, there's no skiing fundraisers for cancer, or, for a lot of things, in fact. And I'd been involved in a few over the years. There was one called Ski for Yellow, which was in Steamboat, that benefited Livestrong organization. There was the Stars Mountain Challenge, which benefited the National Ability Center in Steamboat. So kind of adaptive sports there. And then I'd done one for ALS in Winter Park. And all of these events had like little pieces that were really good. And so I was like, man, it would be super fun to combine all those little pieces that were really fun into an event. And I had talked to, at the time, it was Stacy Culp. She was the executive director of LLS Utah. And she had always expressed interest in creating a skiing event. And so we got together one afternoon and started brainstorming, and then, brought in a few more people, and we were like, okay, we have this idea. We have this idea for an event. Where are we going to do it? And so we started looking around for where we could potentially do it, and happened to talk to Deer Valley, and Deer Valley was like, yeah, we'd love to do it, jumped on it, and kind of spiraled from there. So we put the first year together, not sure what to expect. And the idea was, okay, let's have people raise money, come out and do skiing, mountain challenges, fun day on the slopes. And the top fundraisers will get to ski with Olympians for the day. And that was amazing. And next thing we knew, we're in our fifth edition of the event. And this year we raised $435,000 for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
Starting from $70,000, right, in the first year.
Yeah, the first year we raised $70,000, and we were very happy with that. We're like, man, I think that's a success this year. And so we were like, and it was like 5 of us on this organizing committee, and we were just not sure what was going to happen and how many people we could get into it, but we believed that it would work, and it just spiraled. I think it was like 70, and the next year was like 150,000, and then all of a sudden it was like 400,000, and then 415, and now, or it was maybe like even less than that the third year, and then the last 2 years we've broken the $400,000 mark, and it's just been amazing.
What is this doing for the survivors too? Like you're raising a lot of money, but there are a bunch of survivors who come out and ski. We all ski together, right?
Yeah, it's awesome. You're getting survivors to come together, and you're getting community to come together that show that this money is going somewhere. This money is going to treatments, and the LOS has had a hand in the approval of, like, I mean, hundreds of treatments. And in the last couple of years, it seems like dozens, which in cancer, that's pretty rare. You don't tend to see a lot of movement very quickly. And it's been a kind of a snowball effect the last couple of years where we've seen a lot of really quick improvement. And it shows because you see people out on the slopes wearing their survivor bands, and they're standing alongside people, their friends, their community who supported them along the way, but also recognizing that we have honored guests there, honored heroes, we call them, who are still going through treatment, or have family members going through treatment. And so it puts it in perspective, like, hey, yeah, we've made it and we're lucky to be here, but there's also all these yet to go through this. And I think that is like a powerful motivator. And coming from where I was, diagnosed in 1990, I look at the treatments today and it's like, man, so much more effective, so much less toxic, so amazing. And you see it as a direct result of, like, this is where that money's going. It is saving lives. It is, helping people live healthier lives, having less side effects, less disruption to their everyday life. And that's super powerful. And, Chris, I got to thank you for coming out and supporting the event every year. It's super amazing.
No, it's been great. I've loved to do it, and it is a really interesting connection for me in that one of the survivors, Leif Stolen, they bought my house. His parents bought my old house, so I have a real personal connection to these guys and end up skiing with them. And the interesting part, as you're talking about it, the idea of survivor. I mean, like, we understand, like, we know the definition of that word, but what does that word mean to you, both like looking in the mirror, but also in looking at those other people on the mountain, and the people who are going through the treatments as well?
Yeah, I think it's like, to me, I define it as the opportunity to live a normal life. Whether you do, something amazing, or whether you just live every day, like, that is the definition of survivor. And I think that, not everybody gets that opportunity, unfortunately. For me, going through it as a kid, I looked at cancer as just one thing that I have to do in order to become a normal kid. And, it was really hard as a kid to wrap your mind around, like, why do I have to do this and my friends don't? And that can be challenging, and is certainly like a mental aspect to it. But I think as an adult, I look at it and it's like, man, I'm so lucky. Like, I was diagnosed as a kid. For one, I didn't have a career. I didn't know any better. I just knew that I had to go through this. And so I did. But I look at it as from the adult perspective, and I see these people out there who've been diagnosed once, twice, three times. They've gone through it multiple times. They have their family there. They've kept their support. They've kept their zest for life. They've kept all these things. And, like, that is the definition of survivor. Like, these people are living every day to the fullest, and, really relishing every day that they have to be alive. And it puts that in perspective. And, when you contrast that with those who have yet to go through it, it's like, we understand that journey and we understand how hard it can be. And I think that, looking at it, it's like, I want to do everything in my power to make that treatment that much better for them. So if that means raising money, if that means, volunteering my time, I'm happy to do it, because I understand how hard it and how lonely of a road it can be, because you go through this and suddenly you're kind of isolated. You have this huge challenge in front of you with no certain pathway. You don't know where you're going to go next. You don't know what's going to happen next. And at the same time, you're going to navigate it on your own. There's not too many people that are going to jump in for you. So it really puts it in perspective when you see people jump in and support others who go through this, because it is just, a tough process.
How can people out there support these efforts?
I think the number one thing is just be there for people who are going through it. If you hear of somebody that's diagnosed, you can ask what you can do, and you can be involved in their life. But sometimes it's just as simple as being like, I know they're going to need this, so I'm going to bring it over. I think that's one thing. But I also think, like, we all get tired every year of the ask for money at the end of the year, or the ask for money all the time. There's countless of ways and opportunities to donate money to causes these days, and they're all valid and worthy causes. But when you have that personal connection to something, or if it's something that, like, give them the $10, the $20, I think it makes a huge difference. And if you can't give the money, volunteer the time. If they're doing an event, or they need help driving, kids to school, or picking up groceries or whatever, like, that takes 10 minutes out of your day, and it can mean all the difference in the world. And that's a great way to support people who are going through it.
Well, Bryan, thanks for living such an amazing example for all of us, but also in giving back and giving an opportunity to so many people, both in terms of the skiing, in terms of the leukemia, in terms of life in general, and living fully. So thanks for doing all you do. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. I'm happy to do it. And it's, yeah, really a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please tell your friends. Tell your friends to tune in. Tell them that these are great stories, and they need to like us, and they need to follow us, and we will continue to bring you great content. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to Chris Waddell Living It for more stories on the adaptive community, the Paralympics, artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, experts in the experience of being human. Also follow us on Spotify, Apple, Facebook, and Instagram. I look forward to seeing you next week.